We're back. Welcome back to Those Millennial Pediatricians. This is the podcast where we answer common questions from families in bite-sized, relatable conversations. I'm Dr. Niksha,
And I'm Dr. Deshna.
and we figured we'd dive into a relevant topic, which is traveling with kids.
So, whether you're gearing up for a road trip or an international trip, keeping your kids safe and healthy while traveling is definitely a top priority. So, we'll cover everything from vaccinations to road trip hacks. Generally, traveling can be stressful, so give yourself some grace. Some rules can be broken if you're on vacation, such as screen time, especially on longer trips, longer flights, longer road trips, and that's totally okay. And it's a time that is meant to be enjoyed, and that transient difference in rules might mean more memories for everyone. So, not to be too hard on yourself. But on the other hand, keeping in mind to keep as much of a routine as possible can be super helpful. So that's kind of what this episode will be about. It's not meant to be super long, but we hope that we'll hit as much of these points as we can to get more of a good general big picture on what things to think of when you are traveling. So let's get into the first segment. So that's medical prep. This kind of starts all before you travel. So we wanted to cover the first part, which is vaccines. So if you're traveling internationally, you want to make sure your child is up to date on your routine vaccinations. That's typically something your general pediatrician covers. However, this applies more so to international destinations, more so than domestic destinations, but they might require additional vaccines like yellow fever, typhoid, or hepatitis A. And so, talking about these, we really recommend the CDC's travel website. We'll leave the link down below, but it's cdc.gov/travel. You can actually just input in the name of the country you're going to, and they'll give a list of all the kind of recommended vaccines. And again, these are all recommendations based on the current epidemiologic data that's around, but this is something you should have a conversation about with your child's doctor. And some vaccines, like those for typhoid, they actually require multiple doses or need to be given weeks or a couple months in advance, actually. So it's a good time to plan ahead. The second one is flu shots. So traveling puts kids in close contact with others, whether that's on planes or in crowded places, especially during the holidays. So it's not a bad idea to get those before you head out as well, especially during the peak winter season. And then for infants too young for certain vaccines, you can still reduce the risks by making sure those around them are vaccinated, or if people are having symptoms, you try to keep them away from it or having them masked. The last point is if you're traveling to areas with malaria, definitely talk to your pediatrician about preventive measures like the prophylaxis, which sometimes is not entirely necessary. You just need to make sure you have good preventive measures to keep mosquitoes away from kids, so mosquito repellents. And then last but not least, make sure to pack all of their home medications. Ask your pediatrician or other doctors for refills so you have enough supply, especially if you're traveling out of state or out of country and run out suddenly. And the last little part is allergies. So lots of kids with food allergies. Make sure to bring an EpiPen. That's certainly not something you want to think about and say, oh, shoot, I forgot that at home. Because you never know, they might be exposed to different kinds of foods, or you'll never know if you run into a potential allergen outside their usual environments.
Yeah, I feel like the vaccine one is big too because the peak time for a vaccine to take effect can take a couple of weeks, especially with the flu vaccine. So like Deshna mentioned, making sure that you're planning ahead with which vaccines and other things you might need can be really helpful, because if you go the day before, it might not really be the peak effect that you want before you travel.
Exactly.
Speaking of more traveling, so let's talk about flying safely with kids. So, with flying, parents often ask us when it's safe for babies to fly. So, in general, for healthy full term babies, I feel like we say somewhere between like the 2 to 3 month mark, but always check with your pediatrician, especially if your baby was premature or has any health conditions. So the biggest issue with flying is being in that crowded space for an extended period of time where they could get an illness, get a fever, get sick, and all of that. And then for infants who are born really premature, if they have other conditions, the pressurized cabin can kind of be an issue for their lungs or other things. So it's important to just discuss travel with your pediatrician if you have any questions. One of the big other questions we get, I feel like, and I have this issue too when I'm flying, is ear pain during takeoff and landing and that popping sensation. So we get this question a lot from parents. So nursing or bottle feeding an infant if they're feeding at that time can be really helpful, or you can give them a pacifier if they're younger to help with the pressure. Older kids, you can give them something to chew gum or suck on a lollipop or drink from a straw. So basically, when they're doing that, that's helping keep their eustachian tube open. And in kids, our eustachian tubes are much more horizontal and much flatter than angled as adults. And so that allows for them to have more ear pain and that popping sensation when they're taking off and landing.
The ear pain is also something that's like horrific for me when I fly.
Horrific.
And the other thing is like if they're old enough to understand like how to fake a yawn. Like I do that all the time because
Oh
sometimes the
yeah, I do
gum,
that all the time.
chewing a gum may not be as like forceful, and it just like sometimes the pressure is too strong, but like having a really big yawn sometimes helps too. So
No, that's important. Also, we love a good yawn. Get some oxygen to your
yeah,
brain. There's nothing
exactly.
wrong with
Deep
that. I
breaths.
yawn like 50 times a day. So
There you go.
Other things to think about. So, if your child has a cold or ear infection, those might be reasons to consider delaying travel. Doesn't mean you have to completely cancel all of your plans if this was a big, important trip, but just thinking about that. And then, if they have a cold, but they're, doing okay enough to fly, thinking about flying with congested sinuses can be pretty uncomfortable. So, bringing things like the nose Frida, bringing your bulb syringe, bringing your saline drops for older kids if they want to do like a saline rinse before and after the flight, stuff like that can kind of help with those symptoms as well. And just in general, we say bring plenty of hand sanitizer and disinfectant wipes to clean surfaces. So, like your tray tables and your armrests. We all know planes are pretty germy, so it's good to minimize exposure. And I think we've mentioned this in a previous podcast before, but all those kids born during the pandemic are really good about hand sanitizing. So, they might be more on this than you already are. Some parents like to give Benadryl for flights just to get kids through the flight. So we generally recommend against this because Benadryl has lots of side effects. And I think one that parents don't realize, especially in the hospital, is that it actually can make some kids more agitated, something we call paradoxical agitation. So you think it's going to knock them out, and then instead they just get like this like rage, and they get really, really agitated, and it's almost like worse to deal with. But in general, there's other ways to soothe a child in a flight. Obviously, we know that it can be really, really hard at sometimes, and you can always reach out to your pediatrician if you think that Benadryl is necessary, and they can kind of decide if that's appropriate and work with you to decide what the appropriate dosing would be, if that's relevant.
Yeah. So let's shift to road trips. So the biggest question we get regarding this topic is car seats and whether you should bring one or rent one. And the short answer to this question is if possible, please bring your own car seat. And the number one reason is you'll know if it fits your child properly and meets safety standards. Likely the ones you're renting may meet safety standards, but you really don't know if it fits your child properly. And if you have to rent, you need to inspect it carefully to make sure it's in good condition, hasn't expired, again, meets all the safety parameters for your child. And the second tip is making sure the car seat is correctly installed, especially if you're not at your home base. And if you're not sure, many local fire stations or car seat technicians can help. For longer trips, the plan should be to stop every 2 to 3 hours if you have a younger child, if they're, a baby or a newborn. This is more so if you listen to our prior episode, which is the safe sleep episode, to kind of minimize the adverse, effects of being in an improper sleeping position. And again, for the older kids too, it can kind of help them get out, stretch, and move around. I feel like kids on longer car trips, this definitely happened to me as a kid. You would get super restless and kind of more agitated, bored. So this can also kind of help space out kind of the restlessness.
Yeah, and I would say all of this applies to mix segment 2 and 4. So if you're flying somewhere where you're then going to drive, I feel like all
Yeah.
these points about bringing your own car seat is super helpful because what if you go to like a different country and the car seat situation there is, I don't know, non-existent or it's really complicated. I don't really have this
In
kind
some
of
countries it
experience.
is. It is
Yeah.
non-existent.
Yeah,
So,
like think about when we go to India and they just are
yeah.
like just exist in the car with no seatbelt or anything and you're like, "Okay."
Like,
So,
yeah.
that's where it's helpful and oftentimes car seats are considered like, an item you can just kind of bring on without like sacrificing like a carry-on or a check-in or something like that. So it's worth checking in with the airline to see if they can accommodate that too.
Yeah. Ideally not having your 12-month-old on your lap in a moving vehicle is,
Or even
not
better,
ideal.
like on the back of like a motorcycle,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
on an Indian
Yeah.
highway.
Yeah, yeah. It looks cool while you're looking at it, but then you're like, as a pediatrician, you're like, maybe not the best.
Yeah,
So,
my coronaries are clogging up as
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
speak.
Like this does not look right. So yeah, all of what Aniksha said, definitely keep in mind. Um, the other part about road trips, if you are traveling on the road in hot weather, I feel like during the winter this doesn't really apply for the season we're talking about now, but people certainly travel during the summer. Not leaving the child or baby unattended in the heat, and because even for a short period of time, temperatures, it's like kind of like a greenhouse. Temperatures can rise pretty quickly within a car and cause like heat stroke, or worse, which is death. So we definitely want to avoid that. And the last kind of tidbit, pack like a small emergency kit in the car with essentials. So, first aid supplies, bandages, thermometer, extra clothes, and then non-perishable snacks that you can just keep in the car on the go, granola bars, mixed nuts, etc., etc. And then keep water bottles handy to stay hydrated, non-plastic, but yes, water bottles.
Yeah. So speaking of safety and health on the go, I feel like the nation was already starting to touch on these points, but even outside of just driving, even if you're flying, like a basic medical kit can be really helpful. So generally things like fever reducers, so that's your Tylenol or your ibuprofen or paracetamol in other countries in case you're looking for them in other countries. Those things can be helpful in case your little one gets sick. Antihistamines for allergies can be super helpful. So even though we said Benadryl is not great for a flight, if your kid tends to get allergies or hives or things like that, and you typically use Benadryl at night or you use Benadryl now and then, that's totally fine. Or this is more of like your Claritin, your Zyrtec, or what have you. Other things that can be helpful are a digital thermometer, bandages, and then any prescription medications your child needs, like Deshna mentioned earlier. In general, too, not forgetting sunscreen. This isn't considered like a medication, but sunscreen is super important all the time, especially if you're headed somewhere sunny or snowy. And for babies under 6 months, remembering to use like a lightweight cover or a stroller shade instead of sunscreen directly on their skin. For international travel, check if your destination has clean drinking water. If not, you can stick to bottled water, even for brushing teeth, and then avoid ice in any drinks because those obviously are not filtered typically either. In India, not to bring this up, but I feel like this is my biggest example for international travel because we go here very often. We also would like boil our water, so that kind of could take care of a lot of potential pathogens, but it kind of depends if that's really something you can do if you're like in a hotel or something like that. And then avoiding street food stalls as often as possible because purified water may not be used. And then again, also raw vegetables might not be the best idea. So this includes things like freshly squeezed juice as well. But, exercise your caution and make some general decisions around whether you want to risk it with the street food or not, because sometimes it looks really, really good and everyone wants to try it.
I made the mistake in India like 5 years ago, probably. I had a green smoothie, just like completely raw vegetables. from like a cafe, like a reputable cafe. And
Sad.
I was like on the in the bathroom like all the next like 3 days, and I had a road trip coming up. So if I had to go back, would definitely not recommend.
You know
So
what's worse about that is you were probably like, look at me. I'm being healthy. I'm
yeah,
having a green smoothie. I'm
yes,
not
yes.
having pani puri. I'm not having all this fried stuff. Like, look at me being healthy today.
Yeah, it
And then
was
you're
like
sick
green
for
smoothie.
days and you
Yeah,
can't actually stomach all the fried stuff you wanted to eat. So
it
you
was
know
a
what?
green juice cleanse in a bad way. It was like not the cleanse I wanted.
Yeah, that's not the cleanse anybody wants. That's not
So
fun.
so yeah.
So, well, speaking of Dacia's example, so obviously this is important for young kids because then they're more vulnerable to dehydration if they get diarrhea or vomiting, which is the most likely illness, what we call your traveler's diarrhea or this type of E. coli that causes that watery diarrhea. And so it can often be helpful to pack like oral rehydration solution packets or like you can bring Pedialyte, but that's a lot of liquids that can be really tough. So bringing those packets like your Liquid IV or Water Boy, whatever is popular these days. And then they're generally available in more generic forms in any pharmacy overseas as well. And so they can be kind of really life-saving for you as a parent for rehydrating your kids during stomach bugs and making sure that they're having enough hydration during those rough times.
ORS is great because even if you don't have Pedialyte on hand or if you didn't bring it, it's pretty much the same thing. If
The
not, I would
same.
argue better.
Yeah.
So definitely not a bad thing to have on hand, and it's available anywhere. It's great.
Yeah. And this advice goes for you as a parent as well. So,
Yes, it goes for the whole family actually.
yeah.
So think of it like that.
Or us for everyone, really.
Yeah. Going on to the next segment. So that's sleeping and routines on the road. I feel like this is probably the hardest one because you're literally transporting a child into what is not their typical routine. And the routine is what helps kids adjust to travel. So the number one tip is trying as much as you can to keep naps and bedtimes consistent, even when you're crossing time zones, which I'll address at the end. But if you're staying in a hotel, bringing portable sleep gear like a travel crib or a toddler bed so kids have a familiar sleep environment. Sometimes the hotels also have, depending on where you stay, something similar. So you don't necessarily need to bring it, but you can find out beforehand if that's available. And then packing like a white noise machine, or downloading an app to block out kind of like those unfamiliar like background noises can also help. For long haul flights, we kind of already discussed this. This was the Benadryl that Aniksha mentioned, but we do not recommend medications like Benadryl without talking to your pediatrician first. Again, not only because of that paradoxical effect, but children can be a little more sensitive, can be overly sedating, drowsy, and again, a lot more side effects than we like to have in younger children. There is this app called, I'll link it in the description box for the Spotify and the Apple podcast episode description, but it's called the Time Shift app. So basically, you can download that and then input your travel destination, and then it'll give you recommendations on kind of when to wind down, stop any like outside light or like, blue light from your phones, et cetera, et cetera. To kind of adjust to the sleep times for the destination you're going to. And usually, if this is even feasible, we recommend starting this for your child like a couple of days, if they're younger, a couple of days before you're set to go. So you're kind of already in that pattern before you actually arrive, and that can help help you guys have a smoother transition, usually. So we recommend trying that out.
Yeah, honestly, you move me from from like Pacific time zone to like the mountain time zone, which is literally an hour difference. And I'm already like I can't survive like this. So I can only imagine how parents feel with children
I,
at
I
2 a.m.
don't blame children for behaving. I feel like I'm reverting now. So, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it's really tough. But anyway, so Here are a few other tips. So, just to kind of hammer some of these things home. So, really, the most important things as pediatricians we think are important when you're traveling is one, knowing your child's medical history, right? At this point, you're their parent. You probably know every detail inside and out, but things like bringing a copy of their immunization records or a list of medications just in case can be really helpful. If they run into an issue where they're sick and they need to get medical care done, and if you have some semblance of records or some semblance of like their vaccine records or things like that, or their medications that they take, that can be really, really helpful. Because for some kids who have complex needs, their list of meds is just so long, it's hard to rattle that off the top of your head. A second thing would be packing for temperature changes. So again, dressing kids appropriately for like the season or the weather that you're traveling to, and then also for the transportation. So if they're going to be in a car, you can kind of heat and cool the car down, but for a plane, those are typically pretty cold. So dressing kids in layers, especially on planes or then during long road trips too, it might be helpful to have some different layers in case the temperature changes or things like that. The third thing, really, and I think the most important thing wherever they're going, is keeping kids hydrated. So bringing their favorite water bottles, encouraging frequent sips, especially in flights where the air is dry. I think bringing their own favorite water bottles is super important because, again, like Deshna was mentioning, that's something that's part of their routine. And so it just helps create that familiarity of routine of drinking water wherever they go. And then ORS, 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 ORS. So, or just to reiterate, that oral rehydration solution contains water, sugar, and electrolytes. So if you're having vomiting or diarrhea, you're not only losing that fluid, but you're losing electrolytes as well. Important things like sodium, potassium, chloride, things that when they're out of whack, that actually contributes to nausea and then can make things even worse. So those are important. And then again, you don't have to have Pedialyte. These packets are just as useful. And then finally, obviously, don't hesitate to reach out to your pediatrician with any questions before your travel, whether it's about any of the things we talked about. So vaccines, travel safety, any health concerns, or even if you need some help putting together like an appropriate checklist for your children when traveling.
And so there you have it. That was our guide kind of to travel safely and healthily with your kids. This was a shorter podcast episode, but we kind of wanted to hit all the important points because I feel like we could go on and on about each and every little tidbit we have for traveling. We hope you'll kind of use this as an overall guide to make your family travel less stressful and more enjoyable. And with that, thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment or a review, and share it with a fellow parent if you found it helpful. Safe travels. We'll see you at the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.